Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Here we go. It is showtime. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, the daily edition, and we are wading through the snow day in this part of the world. And so I had to wonder, how that is affecting the campaign, given the fact that it's so short to begin with. Can the campaigns actually afford to lose a day out there? I know some are planning on the debate prep, so that might be a good time to do it. But I do see there were schedules out there for other folks to be out and about. So we'll get into that. Welcome in. By the way, if you have a hint or a thought on who the voice of Queen Victoria is, leave us a comment. And I just want to see who you think that might be, because I'm getting a few questions. So just curious to know what you think might be going on there. All right, let's get to the panel. Around the table today, John Tory is here. He's the former mayor of the city of Toronto. Might have heard of him. Keith Leslie, regular at CH Television and a longtime observer and reporter at Queen's Park. Our resident and founding pollster, John Wright, and Amanda Galbraith joining us from Oyster Group. And I just kind of quick around the table here, just to talk about what went on in D.C. I watched some of the conversation that the Premier had from the podium at the Chamber of Commerce, Amanda. Certainly, predictably, the trip took up all the media oxygen on this side of the border. But even as I watched what was going on with the Chamber conversation and the speech there, it was tepid in terms of the response and the applause. And the observation that I heard from most of the reporters in the room was that about 80 of the 120 people in the room were Canadians. So he was preaching to the choir.
Yeah, I think broadly the tactic of him going to the U.S. was, from a campaign perspective, a smart one. I also think it's just actually what she should be doing, right? Like this is the most existential threat today. We're hearing news that more tariffs are potentially coming down. So what should the Premier of Ontario's most populous province be doing? Be doing that. Where there are certainly glitches on part of the trip, I think there were. Most Ontarians probably aren't picking that stuff up like we would be as observers. I will say, I thought the last minute weird White House meeting that was brokered by some random North Carolinian firm called Checkmate that no one's heard of, apparently, that was hired by the Federation, the Council of Federation, which is a whole weird story. To me, they just, honestly, it looked bizarre. They were kind of scraggling around out front of the White House. It looked a little bit like the Beverly Hillbillies Go to Washington at that optic. So I thought that was not the best look for all the premiers. I thought the Premier himself stood out as, he can kind of fill his suit a bit. And I think he was a bit more circumspect in the meeting. Unfortunately, Premier Eby sort of briefed a bit more colorfully on the meeting, which caused the administration to sort of push back and say, we never agreed that you weren't going to be the 51st state, which isn't completely wild. So to me, that was a bit of a faceplant. But I think, overall, Ontarians' impression is probably that Doug Ford's there fighting for them in Washington, and that's not a bad thing.
John Tory, what do you think?
I think about the same as what Amanda said. My theory would be that I don't think it can't hurt down there, to have a chance to have a bit of FaceTime with some of these politicians and others. It will help Doug Ford back here a bit. I don't think all that much, but I think it'll reinforce what he's been saying all the way through. And other than that, I don't think it made much of a difference. I don't think it makes a big difference down there because we have trouble getting attention there amidst everything else that's going on. Back here, it did suck up most of the oxygen. But again, I don't think it makes much difference. So I think if there was a difference for Canada, it was a slight positive. And for Doug Ford, a slight positive. Otherwise, not a big deal.
Well, we've always said that, Ontario, Canada, the rest of the country, when we're talking about this, we had to put it in terms of the Americans would understand. And the one thing I took away from it yesterday after the Premier was scrumming with media was that he was framing it in terms of that discovery, in terms of what the imbalance is vis-a-vis the trade and how it would affect Americans and American jobs.
I didn't realize that the U.S. uses 5 million tons of aluminum, and they can only produce 750,000 tons. and that Quebec gives them 3 million tons. Their system would shut down if they didn't ship them aluminum.
It would be a slow message, in terms of getting it out there. But I think that's the conversation that needs to be pounded away at, Keith, in terms of what the effect of the tariff is. The point where the Americans really aren't paying any attention to this. They're going to pay attention to it when all of a sudden they don't have the aluminum to do it, or they're going to pay a hell of a lot more for that aluminum to get their job done.
Absolutely, especially when we've had confirmation from the White House that when the 25% tariffs and 10% on energy come in, and the 30-day exemption is lifted or postponement is lifted, it's going to be 50% on steel and aluminum. So can we even contemplate what that means? As good a messaging as Ford has got there, and this is exactly the kind of thing we need to get, drill home to the Americans. The headline coming out of the whole White House trip by the premiers was, the fellow, the deputy chief of staff for the 33rd, sub-nations government leaders that they met with in the White House, he ran out and said, no, we never agreed that Canada wouldn't be a 51st state, as Premier Eby claimed. So that was not the headline Canada wanted to see. And yet that's the headline on the Canadian news feeds this morning. So if Canadians are seeing anything about the Premier's trip there, that's what they're seeing. And at the same time, we saw the federal finance minister, Dominic LeBlanc, meeting with the Commerce Secretary, Lutnick. That seems like a much more substantial meeting. That seemed like, actually getting someone who has the true ear of Donald Trump, as opposed to this junior staffer that the Premier's arranged, as Amanda said, a very last-minute meeting with. Again, the headline, it says it all. There's James Blair guy come out, and whoever he is, a deputy chief of staff of something or another, and he said, we never agreed to that. So that's your take, with that we're still fighting this whole 51st state bullshit, as opposed to just, getting on message about, as Doug Ford tried to get there, this aluminum tariff is going to kill you. That's the message they got to get across, but it doesn't seem to be sinking anywhere. And of course, how do we do this when we've got the Trump plan, this fires, flooding the zone, this fire hose of news on 38 different topics? We got Gaza, we got Putin, we got everything. How is Ontario and Canada supposed to get its message through in the face of everything that's going on there in that White House, in that Oval Office? Because you've got Elon Musk and his kids standing there. It's so far off the charts as any of us are supposed to know how to deal with this. I think we just have to sort of sit back and write it out. But the premiers, it was wise to go, but the overall headline is not good.
Well, the distraction when Elon Musk had his kid in the Oval Office, right next to the Resolute desk there, he's digging for gold while the conversation's going on, and that's what went viral. But John, to Keith's point, here we've got the feds having a conversation at what seems to be a fairly substantial level, and the premier's off talking to who knows who. What happened to the unified, Team Canada approach here? Surely the feds and the premiers should have been talking to say, while you're doing this, we're doing that. Or there didn't seem to be any connectivity there.
Yeah, but this is a little bit like Phil Spector Wall of Sound, right? Like everybody's yakking at this issue. It's not just the premiers. It's playing well into the to Premier Ford for the campaign. I mean, I'm going to show something you can't see in the podcast, but there's the photograph from the Toronto Star, the premier out front. I mean, it's the money shot. He's there. He's representing the premiers. They had to go. I mean, you've also got people like Krista Freeland and Jagmeet Singh who are on CNN screaming and threatening the president. All of this plays domestically here and has no dent whatsoever down there. I mean, the finance minister, Dominic LeBlanc, had the most substantial meeting in Washington and basically walked away and said, we've got an understanding of where our issues are. Well, take a look at everything that's in the news. So if you frame it in a campaign perspective, I don't think anybody's in the weeds like we are. They're just seeing it as premiers go to Washington, full court press. I think the other issue that we really have to be looking at now is that the narrative gets taken away from all of us and is now on the doorstep of the president, who's going to be putting in reciprocal trade issues. There's a deadline coming up in March, which we all work towards. The impact is now already being felt in Ontario because there are orders that are being cut back. They have been going that way now for the last 2 weeks. So we're going to start to feel it in terms of the real employment situation here in the province. And I think, again, framing this in the podcast of the daily election routine, this is playing exactly where the Conservatives want it. And if you look at the top line numbers right now, they really haven't changed much. The average polling rate for this government right now in the election campaign is 45%, which yields 99 seats. You've got the Liberals at 27, which is up, and the NDP a little down at 18%. So they're basically tied at 11 seats apiece, which gives them both party status, and the Greens have got 2. So overall, the timing, the pitch, the execution, everything from a campaign perspective is smack on. And secondly, this is going to now suck up all the oxygen anyways as a wall of sound continues going forward, and most people are just not in the weeds on it.
Just to be clear, I'm under the impression that you need 12 seats to have official party status for Queen's Park.
Well, they're just on the 11 plus or minus 3. There I'm
just saying they're going the wrong way here, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it's an important point, Ford, despite everything that we've said, is running the table here, John.
Absolutely.
But you know what?
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know what Sean you meant, but I think I'm a bit of a contrarian on this. I think the trend lines, and I realize the distribution of the vote, in other words, where those votes are concentrated, it makes a difference in the seat count. But the last time we had numbers that were 44 or thereabouts for the PCs, 31 or 2 for the Liberals, and 17 or so for the NDP, you had a substantially more seats for the Liberals than you did for the NDP. Yeah. And while I know that's not why Bonnie Crombie is running, she's running to win. If she can restore them to a seat count that I think will be higher than what John said, given the vote counts, that will be at least one step on the way back for a party that was decimated. Because I think that is more where the trend line, it's hard to discern one other than for the PCs to stay ahead. But I think Bonnie Crombie is kind of pulling away, and there's now quite a gap between her and the NDP, and I think it means she can win some of those seats in Toronto, for example, that are between her and the NDP.
Yeah, I want to let me just put one thing in perspective, and then I'll just shut up. The one thing that I noticed back in late September, I did some polling in 4 major centers across the country. It was Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, and Toronto. And what I found there were 3 numbers that really mattered at the time. You had an average, when you just averaged it out, some being higher in Vancouver and Toronto, lower in the West, you had about 25% who supported the federal Liberals. And then when you knocked off those people who were just diehard Liberals, you were down to about 19%, which is where Trudeau fell to in January. So you had a baseline for him. Now, what it also said was those people who had committed to the federal Conservatives and the NDP in those places averaged out to about 30%, 36% in Toronto, and then down to 26% in Edmonton, who would switch or take a look at another Liberal leader if, in fact, somebody got in. So you've got those 3 numbers. You got 19 where Trudeau was, 25 where the average was, and then you had another 3 and 10 who committed elsewhere to bring the vote up. So in comes Mark Carney. In comes the new issues dealing with trade. And all of a sudden, the Liberal federal numbers start to move up to the point where you've now got Léger suggesting that there could be even a dead heat tie between Poilievre and Carney. So the Conservatives are still leading overall, but what's moving is, in fact, that Liberal vote. So I would suggest, and to John's point, I would agree. I think what's happening here is we're seeing that urban vote in most places, but particularly in Toronto, starting to move up. It's radiated from the federal side. It's radiating sideways, which means that people are more open to the door to having a Liberal there. I think where it's going to make the difference is in a place like St. Paul's. And here you have had Jill Andrews, who's been the NDP candidate for the last 2 successfully elected in St. Paul's. But now you've got Stephanie Smythe, from CP24, well known. She's got, the backbone of this riding where I live in St. Paul's is Liberal. And while it may be federal now, it was a very tight kind of thing. I think that's what's happening here. We're starting to see a lift in the numbers, which is buoying Bonnie Crombie when she's out there. She's seeing it. It is artificial, but it's opening the door for a lot of those urban seats to start to swing back. Who's losing? Jagmeet Singh and the federal NDP are down to 14 to 16%. 14 to 16%. So we're seeing the Merit Styles vote dropping down about 2 points. So part of this is really a federal phenomenon, but it's opening the door for the provincial Liberals, who seem to have a lot more focus and organization nowadays and enthusiasm than they did even 10 days ago.
So let me ask you, Amanda, based on all of that and how we're seeing this sort of ecosystem kind of come and go, and it's growing organically in front of our eyes in terms of the feds overlapping with the province. It might sound like a stupid question, and I'm famous for that, but are the tariffs even an issue anymore in this campaign?
I think they are still an issue for sure. I think they are going to continue to knock people. So all people are going to talk about, right, when they go in. So yes, I think they're still an issue. And even if they were waning as an issue, I think the premier is going to continue to work to make them an issue, because he wants to run against Donald Trump. He doesn't particularly want to run against Bonnie Crombie or Merritt Stiles because he doesn't want to give them any oxygen. So I think it's going to continue to matter. I think that John is right around, the Johns are right around sort of an uptick for the Liberals. And I do think their efforts around pushing healthcare, which they've been very focused on, and we've talked about some of the problems or factual issues they've had. But when the premier's not being asked about U.S. issues, he's being asked about healthcare, which means at least what they're pushing aggressively is at least punching through as an issue, even if they're not capitalizing on it electorally.
Yeah, yesterday we were talking about Keith, and there's been no shortage of criticism of the Liberal campaign, specifically how unprepared they were. Their opening day of the campaign was, a disaster. The NDP seemed to have more traction early on, but to everyone's point, we seem to be seeing some drop in the attention or traction of the NDP, a little bit more wind under the wings of the Liberals. And yesterday, Crombie was on John Moore's show, and I listened, and we played a clip in the podcast yesterday. She sounded like she had everything off the top of her head. She sounded more like the leader we probably would have expected, but it was still her, kind of pushing it out. But I thought it was interesting yesterday when she was campaigning in Toronto, back on the healthcare, but she was not front and center in terms of the message that was coming out. It was an ER doctor.
You can see the waiting times to see an ER doctor are 6 to 12 hours. But some patients we know wait far longer. And once you've seen an emergency doctor and it's agreed upon that you need to be admitted to hospital, the average time in Ontario to get that bed is 24 hours. 24 hours for an elderly patient, 24 hours with someone with dementia, 24 hours with someone who's injured. And in my experience with my patients, they are waiting up to 5 days on an ER stretcher waiting for a hospital bed.
5 days. I know. I recently, my mom was in need of some medical attention and ended up in the emergency at a Toronto hospital and spent but a day and a half in the hallway on a stretcher. Now, she had to have surgery, so they put her at the top of the line, and she was in and out in 3 days. But Keith, there's no end to that. So I just thought that was a really effective, probably the most effective campaigning that Bonnie Crombie has done without saying a word.
Well, as a newsman, is there any other clip, any better clip she's going to provide than what you just ran? No. That messaging coming from an ER doctor and winding it up with, we heard, he was going to wait this long, 5 days. Boy, that hits at home, and that hits at home hard. Also, the Liberal campaign that they launched with this, there was a message on every chair. They're calling it ER chair healthcare. Gone beyond hallway healthcare and ambulance bay healthcare. Now you're sitting in the ER chair, people with open wounds getting treated in an ER waiting room chair, not a medical stretcher or anything like. Anyway, the insanity of this is exactly the kind of message that can derail the Ford campaign. Tariffs, which he's absolutely going to continue to hammer, and apparently, Donald Trump is going to continue to feed that narrative. We've got the reciprocal tariffs coming today, as Amanda mentioned earlier. So tariffs are absolutely going to continue to be the base of the PC campaign and protect Ontario. But the healthcare, they are very vulnerable on this. And I think the Liberals keep delivering that kind of message. Their campaign is getting stronger. Bonnie Crombie's interviews and news conferences I've watched the last couple, way stronger than when they first started out. She's getting her feet underneath her. And as well, to John Tory's point earlier, we can't necessarily believe these poll numbers, but the trends, I look for the trends as well. And we're absolutely seeing, provincially, the PCs, holding more than their own, but the Liberals are growing up and the NDP are falling way back, and federally the same thing. And I think Tim Hudak raised this on our last week's podcast, that the NDP have got a bit of an identity crisis, and they don't know what they're representing right now, and the voters can see through that, And so, any of those progressive voters, many more of them are leaning Liberal. So I think that's going to play out more. And I think, as we say, even if Ford can manage to get the 99 to 100 seats, which, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
It's going to be difficult, or I think the Liberals will be able to get to official party status, given the trends we're seeing right now. They should be able to at least get to that 12 seat. I mean, let's face it, 2 elections in a row without official party status for the Liberal Party of Ontario is stunning. A third one would be, devastating. That would be the end of the party, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, there'd have to be conversations about, selling the furniture, never mind the house. John Tory?
Dave, I want to be fair, because we spent 2 podcasts really dumping on the Liberals for the visual way they presented themselves. The one day when Bonnie Crombie was reading that email off her phone, not very well. And then the first day when she was there with the hat on and there was sort of people wandering around behind her looking quite disorganized. That was a very professionally presented clip. And those things don't make a huge difference, but they make a difference. And I think the other thing that is going to make a difference is if they can get any significant part of the debate to come to focus on healthcare and what the emergency doctor just said, because that's where, as well, it's easy, and I'm not saying he's prone to do it, but it's easy for Premier Ford to make a mistake and be flippant or in some way dismiss that issue and try and get it back to tariffs, which will be what he's trying to do, and that can give her further ground as talking about something people really do care about. So I just think all of this is an indication the Liberal campaign has sort of matured in the first couple of weeks. I can remember being a first-time party leader, being out on a campaign like that, and it's all focused on you, even though there are many other candidates running with you, and your mistakes and your good days and your visual presentations. And she started off very rocky, and she's kind of found her feet, and all that means is she's now able to be more competitive and is certainly opening a gap with the NDP.
John Wright, the question that I asked of Amanda around whether or not tariffs are part of still an issue in the campaign. I understand that the parties will be dealing with it as an issue, but healthcare still tops the list in terms of the biggest worry of Ontarians. Affordability still the top thing. So do we see the voters perhaps say, okay, we know tariffs are coming, we got to brace for them. In the meantime, I want to make sure that I've got a doctor, or I want to make sure that I've got some level of affordability in my life that means I can get to the end of the week.
2 different ways to ask these questions. One is there's a general question that you ask. It's a pre-coded, meaning that you've got a whole different series of slots that you can put your vote into for being concerned about different issues. So, there would be healthcare and transportation, and now it's broken down like affordability, the cost of living, like a whole bunch of those things, right? And people get a choice of 3, and it lifts healthcare to the top, and then you've got affordability and a series of others. When you add them up, it actually goes to the top. So it's healthcare, affordability and healthcare overall. If you ask people about the tariffs, it's sitting like at 5% way down the bottom. Okay, so that's one way to suggest that your daily life is really about affordability and about healthcare, and not a whole lot has changed in terms of all the overall feeling that we have in life. If in fact you take those issues, which are the most important within the campaign, clearly fighting for the tariff issues, the impact of the cost of living and all that sorts of rises right to the top. Okay, so like you're going to get more people on the side of the page that the 44 or 45% are for the premier. Okay. The issue for me, I want to go back to what John and said a moment ago. I think you're absolutely right that Bonnie Crombie's maturity as a provincial leader has gone up, and it does, because anybody who's out there gets ground down into talking points and being very focused, and the campaign starts to come together. We criticized the visuals, we criticized how she was responding, and I'd say in the last 48 hours it's been very impressive. Although I've always wondered why the Liberals go away from wearing the red dress or the coat or whatever you have in it, and go into the kind of Del Duca blue, which was the other day, and it's black in that one. Like, I don't get that, but nonetheless, it's better. I still believe that she's got to have more of an urban kind of focus on the issue, but the one issue that cuts through as a constant is that healthcare issue. And now she's got third parties that are coming in to give her that credibility. And I think, if it's going to be the siren call, then clearly in the urban areas, it has a big effect, but also in the outside areas, it is an issue for the local folks. So I would say that the campaign itself has matured. It's got the lift from the federal polls that they can see. She's buoyed. You can actually see that she's engaged, but much more focused. And healthcare is something that they're just going to carry right through because it's beating the NDP. That's where they're starting to make their mark. So they're not. I would argue that the Liberals are not so much focused on the Tories. It just can't, like in certain ridings they will be, but they're really taking on Merritt styles. And I don't think that Merritt, to what Keith said, I don't think that they found their voice in much the same way. And a lot of it has to do with how the campaign of the Liberals is starting to move forward.
Yeah, what's the fail point there for them, Amanda? The NDP. Yesterday I was saying if tariffs are on the table, then holy cow, Sault Ste. Marie and Hamilton, that's the backyard, the backbone of NDP. Life. Surely that should have been front and center, screaming from mountaintops. And if they were, I didn't hear it.
Yeah, I think the NDP have two problems to my mind. One is just the broader drag from the federal party. To John Wright's point earlier, Jagmeet Singh should be packed up and shipped off. I do not understand how he's still the federal leader. The NDP keep their leaders around like Pigpen keeps blankets, and they really need to just deep six them. And I think he's dragging them down provincially. And then I think the second issue that they're facing is that Merritt's campaign the NDP campaign looks good. She looks professional. But the interesting part about the Liberal campaign, from talking to folks in their war room, is they view themselves as like very scrappy, right? They're throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. Sometimes it looks really messy, but sometimes the event, like the one we saw yesterday, is pulled off well. And I think part of that is it's getting attention, even if she's talking about push-ups, versus with the NDP campaign kind of sticking to like a more mainstream message. They're having a harder time punching through. And I think as that piles on through the campaign, it's increasingly challenging for them. So, and also what do the NDP stand for? Like rent control? Like that's the only thing that I've really noticed. So I think they either need to get scrappier and punchier if they want to move through that. And I do think they're getting dragged down by their federal cousins for sure.
Well, they are going to pay your bills on the 407, although they haven't talked a lot about that since the campaign started either.
That in the tunnel will be an interesting evolution we haven't even talked about the tunnel.
Well, you know what?
That's what I want to get to. Let's get to the Ford stuff. He's not campaigning all that well when he goes off topic from tariffs, the tunnel, and let's conflate, welfare with ODSP and all that kind of stuff. I think you mentioned it in an email, Dave. He's his own worst enemy. And when he does go off the tariff topic, he does get himself into trouble. This whole thing about the tunnel, tens of billions of dollars, at least. We've heard estimates anywhere from 30 to 60 to $100 billion. He's, well, just give me a blank check to do this. No feasibility study, no cost estimate per kilometer, 50 kilometers of tunneling underneath them. How is this appealing to anyone outside of the GTHA? I have no idea, especially when they're going to be paying for it. That seems to me just a real fail on the Ford government that they let him even talk about this thing. I know it's a talker, but he doesn't need it right now. It's a huge distraction. And the same thing when he was asked, and this was almost a week ago now, when he was asked about, all the other parties are committing to doubling Ontario disability support. This is the people that cannot work. Doctors have said they cannot go to work. They're surviving on $1,368 a month, I believe it is. All the other parties are committed to doubling it. He's offering the same thing the Tories implemented a few years ago, which was inflation. They've tied it to the rate of inflation. That's okay. You can have a position on this. We can't afford to do that. It's several billions of dollars. But he then goes on to say, and people on Ontario welfare, Ontario Works, they call it, which is what the Tories branded welfare, they're staying at home all day, sitting on the couch watching the Flintstones. Well, man, are you still in the 1980s? Because I don't know when the last time the Flintstones was on during the daytime for people to stay home stoned watching the shows go by. But this is what he was alleging. And that's sort of such 1970s or 80s style of welfare bashing that is just crazy.
But Keith, that's who he's talking to, though. He's talking to people who actually did watch the Flintstones back in the day and know what it is. And so in that sense, with his own base, that stuff doesn't hurt. But I think in the debate, you're right, that will be, if they come back and remind him of that, that's when he doesn't necessarily do as well on the discipline. And he's going to have to be so disciplined on the two debates not to sort of take the bait. Because they'll come back and say exactly what you just said. Here you are talking about people that don't have can't walk or have a debilitating illness. And you're saying they're watching the Flintstones all day. And his base, think that Flintstones thing is just fine. But it's a lot of the other voters. Will they have time? Will he have the discipline to, steer it back away from that? Because his base think the Flintstones, that they know what that is and they know what he means.
But leaders should not conflate disability support and welfare.
I agree.
They just should not. As a leader, you should not.
I
It's
totally
just
agree.
such a low shot. It's a
I
cheap
agree.
shot.
Just to jump in there, though, like the previous question about the NDP, this is the exact NDP's problem, right? She's the official opposition, has the most likelihood of forming government. We should be spending more time on her. And Keith is like, yeah, that's fine, but that's boring. Let's talk about the crazy tunnel, or we can talk about like they're just like, there's nothing there for us to grab onto. And I think that is really, it's actually wild to me.
Okay, but
It's
isn't
also
this,
because the
isn't this an
NDP spirit.
NDP issue? Isn't this what the NDP should be just hammering away at? Listen to the way he conflates. Listen to the way he talks down to people who live in poverty. Listen to, like, I don't even hear that.
No, I know. It's like the girl at the dance that nobody wants to talk to. She's just on the wall waiting for someone to notice
when
her.
you promise to
working.
take the 407 fees and you don't tell us how you're going to pay for it, the NDP, you're looking at something like that we know what's the private sector going to charge us to buy back that highway? Again, tens of billions of dollars, and we're going to let the NDP. I don't think so. That's the kind of stuff that when the NDP promises, people go, okay, they write them off with that kind of stuff. So anything else they've said since then has not gotten any traction. For that very reason, we can't trust you with our money.
But in the end, this entire strategy is proving to be successful. I don't think it's happening deliberately, but when he talks about the tunnel and when he talks about the ODSP thing, which actually is objectionable, but I mean, at the end of the day, here we are talking about it, and here it is on the news every night. And what they're not doing, I think I've quoted Premier Davis before when I used to work for him, and he'd say, well, thank God they're talking about that stuff and not the real issues. Because in the end, every minute spent talking about the tunnel and every minute spent talking about his comments about ODSP are a minute not spent talking about healthcare and all the real problems in healthcare. And so to that extent, it plays to his current positioning, which is that he's just sitting there at 44% and nothing's knocking him down. That's the other part of this polling. We can talk about the other two parties moving around for second place. He hasn't budged an inch from 44%, which is 4 points higher than he got the last time and won a majority government.
John Wright, you look like you're dying to say something.
No, never. It's just, as I say, I have cynic face all the time. I try not to take sides. Resting cynic face. Look, I look at this from a more tactical, analytic thing. When Austin Matthews walked out onto the rink before the Swedes game, and when they were introducing all different teams, you could, and you're in the Montreal Forum, you could forgive people for booing Austin Matthews because he sometimes wears a Maple Leaf jersey. But they booed because he was wearing the American jersey. And that is going to continue over the next period of time because that is where the sentiment is in this country. And it's where the issue is. And so while 90% of the people in the media and everything else, no matter what you're talking about, every talk show, every podcast, everything is talking about tariffs, there's a graduate seminar going on in another room where they're talking about the other stuff. And it's, and one could argue that if you're going to go after the 905, you might as well pitch a tunnel. Like, why not? Because, you've got congestion and you can say whatever you want, including, well, we'll cost it after the election campaign because no one is listening. The wall of sound is there. So from a tactical analytic point of view, I wouldn't want, the premier made a gaffe and said about, the Flintstones, but, we just referred to the hillbillies, right? And no one watches that anymore, frankly. So there are two games going on here. One is the big game in the big arena with the booing crowds, with the tariffs, and the real concern and the bonus for the Tories, frankly, is that Trump says, well, I ought to wait for March the 3rd. Well, that's a few days after the election campaign. So he's going to ride it all the way out with his 44%. His big issue is going to be getting people out to the polls. That's for sure, but he's still going to win. So the question then becomes, again, how much impact does it have for the premier to be talking about those other issues? And if I'm on a campaign, I'm saying zilch, like keep it focused very much and come back to the point. The question is whether or not this is going to drive the vote from the NDP to the Liberals and whether or not the lift in federal numbers are going to give Bonnie Crombie, with a much more focused campaign, the inroads to become that official opposition. And I think that's where we're starting to see this movement. But I don't think that you're going to see any change in the Conservative campaign, and I don't think you're really going to see much more of an impact unless there's some catastrophic change. But I got to tell you, by Donald Trump saying that he's going to, bring out his tariffs on March the 3rd, gives the Tories the runway between now and then just to talk about almost nothing but tariffs and the impact on jobs in this economy.
We've referenced the reference to the Flintstones. Was that sort of a reference, your why I oughta, to Ralph Cramden?
No, that's the Bugs Bunny one.
Oh, the Bugs Bunny.
The Bugs Bunny one.
Right.
I oughta.
Right. Boom, zoom to the moon, Alice.
I don't know how you've done it, but I know you've done it, right?
One of the things I do want to kind of come back to, and I just want the collective thoughts on this, because I think it's on the tariffs, there's the important question of cause and effect. And John Tory, everybody's hair is on fire because the tariffs are going to go on. It may be 50% on aluminum and steel, et cetera, based on how this is all playing out. The immediate impact is on the American market. I mean, I realize there are already companies in Canada who are telling us that they're having orders canceled, but the immediate effect is going to be on the Americans. So there's got to be some runway before they can actually come up to speed in terms of capacity, as the Premier noted. Where's the balance in there? I mean, I realize that at some point we're going to have to live with these, but at what point is there a tipping point in your view where, okay, now we're into the abyss. There's no coming back from it, because it could really, effectively, foundationally destroy the economy.
I think it's some time from now. And if you look back even to previous episodes, like as far back as Richard Nixon, I talk about hillbillies and Flintstones, there was a shock that took place there where he put on a surcharge, and it took quite a few months, bordering on a year, but by the time the year was up, it was taken away. In other words, there was some political resolution reached. The last time with Trump, there was a political resolution reached. I don't think that's the point. I mean, I think the practical impact will take some time to be felt. I think the point is, in the context of the election and what follows, fear and insecurity that people have, the unknown. People have been told that it could have a 2% impact on our GDP. And if you ask people to define that, they probably wouldn't be able to. And I'm not being critical. I'm just saying they wouldn't know exactly what that means. They just know it's not good for them. And if you look at elections all the time, they're about leadership all the time, but they're also about pocketbook. And, if you have fear and insecurity about your pocketbook, and we have enough stuff going on with mortgage renewals, and that was all happening before this, I think that's why, people are so afraid of this, because they don't really know what the practical implications are going to be or when. They just know it all sounds bad and that they need to have kind of strong leadership to see them through it.
Amanda, then if we take that and we look at the sort of the playbook vis-a-vis Ontario, is it rinse and repeat in a federal election campaign, which is likely to come in the next 8 weeks?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, people are messaging me right now talking about wrapping planes and stuff. So I'm like, what is happening?
Wow.
Yeah, I think certainly, it will benefit. Well, I think either they're all going to have to run against the U.S., right, in their own ways. And I think you're seeing, I think the Conservatives in particular dial up that messaging in a way that makes sense for them. I think Pierre Poilievre's event in Iqaluit was really emblematic of that. And actually it was a good event and a good message, even though it sort of got drowned out by the initial tariffs on steel and aluminum. So I think we'll continue to see that. You saw Stephen Harper, former PM, pop up and put some real aggressive language out there in the window around, we should lay bleeding out on the streets before they take our country, which is not Canadian typical language. But I think, I, for one, was like, yes, like pounds table. So yeah, I think we're going to see tariffs really be the big piece of this, which, may play to the benefit of Mark Carney to a certain extent. But it'll be interesting to watch if that takes place over the next little bit. And then, of course, the real repercussions for our economy and our country. It's not just electoral gamesmanship. It's actually people's jobs and lives and businesses.
Yeah, and I think the long-term effect of this, Keith, is going to be like the frog in the boiling water feel to it. You're not going to know you're in trouble until it's too late.
Well, right now I'm convinced that to John Tory's point about Canadians understanding the impact of this, what a hit to the GDP means and all that, what they know is that Trump threatened economic force against Canada. They're seeing some sort of economic force. We're being warned of the dangerous impacts of this. And we're wondering, and this is the crucial part of it all, and we keep hearing it emphasized, at first it was a joke, is this economic action intended to force us to become the 51st state? Some sort of economic union leading to statehood for Canada. That's what I think has been the most unifying thing for most Canadians right now. This whole Buy Canadian thing, the patriotism that's come out in ways that, quite frankly, I haven't seen in decades of reporting. I mean, it's quite stunning. And I'm convinced it's the fear, not only of the tariffs and what they're going to do. We all can understand that Canada's economy is a tenth the size of the American one. What can we do against that in the end run if they want to bully us to death? But we can stand up against them. We can fight against them. And there is, I think, a strong feeling of fighting. To Stephen Harper's words, bleeding in the streets to defend our sovereignty. But this is what Canadians are viewing right now. These tariffs, whether they understand that or not, I don't buy steel. You know, I drink my Coke out of bottles, not out of can. You know, whatever kind of nonsense you're thinking about this, it's going to impact all. It's going to hurt our markets right off the bat. But let's face it, if it starts costing jobs in the United States, that's what we need to see happen. Or we need to see Trump realize that this could happen. The question now is, does he know? Of course he knows. Does he care? He doesn't care. It's all about disrupting everything. So Canada has to play a very strategic game here and walk a very fine line. And will we be doing it in the federal election that's coming? I'm not convinced Jagmeet Singh wants to see a federal election within 8 weeks. I think he may go right till October, but that's another whole issue.
Yeah.
I think, we're going to see these issues still play out. As I say, I think this whole 51st state thing has really, really scared the shit out of Canadians and unified them in a way that we just haven't seen before, because there's, oh, well, he'll back down, he'll walk it back. No, this guy comes screaming out of the meeting and saying, I never said we agreed to you not being a 51st state. Holy shit, that's craziness.
John Wright, how are you going to celebrate Flag Day then this year? Because, it would have been a sub, the kicker in a newscast on the weekend, the 60th anniversary of the Canadian flag. All of a sudden, everybody's got their lapel pins out and ready to go.
Two things on that, and one plays to the campaign. My Canadian flag for the front door arrives today. So it'll make it through here, and I'm going to put it up, and there you go. The second thing, though, is an interesting campaign sidebar, and that is that I last Thursday decided to go to the Metro grocery store and start to inventory the Canadian versus the American stuff. And I actually made a conscious effort to switch from the Starbucks that we had to Kicking Horse, great British Columbia product. And I picked, all three of their different kinds so I could get the taste right in what I wanted to do. So beginning on Friday morning, I started to have what's called Kick Horse Power Horse 454. Tasted exactly like the Starbucks we've been having. By Friday evening, for some unapparent reason to me, I was starting to get palpitations. The next day, it increased. By Sunday at the Super Bowl game, I turned to my wife and said, I've got so many heart palpitations, I got to go to the hospital. So I went down to St. Mike's during the Super Bowl. And my experience in the emerge ward was actually really great. It took 3 hours to get in and out. I was heart specialized all the way through to the end. Doc comes and looks at me and says, you're throwing off PVCs. You got an extra bead here. What's going on? And I said, well, he says, have you done anything different in the last, couple of days to your diet or anything? And I said, yeah, I changed coffee. So we looked it up. Each one of those 8-ounce glasses has 50 more milligrams of caffeine.
Jesus.
The equivalent of an espresso shot is 68 milligrams. I'm putting 3 extra espresso shots into my body. And he goes, stop it. So I guess, in a way, I tested a few things. Number one, my resolve to give my life for Canada. Number two, to buy Canadian. And I think I'm a commercial for them saying, you know what, your coffee really kicks ass. No question about it. But thirdly, my experience in the healthcare system in downtown Toronto, and yes, it was during the Super Bowl game, and yes, I made it home for the final moments, was kind of like, yeah, when you need it, it was there. I got in, and what cost me 20,000 American dollars when I was at the Grand Prix in November of 2 years ago in Las Vegas, because I walked in with, kind of being dehydrated. It was 3 hours there, 20,000 Canadian dollars, cost me nothing, and I was in and out the other door when I really needed it. So that's my own personal experience. I'll go with the flag, thank you very much. And I've got a different kind of Canadian brew that I'm going to be using from now on. But it was a very interesting few days in my life. But you got, as I said, that Kicking Horse, man, does it ever got power. So you might like it, try it out, but have fewer cups.
Yeah, well, my wife will be glad to hear you had a good experience at St. Michael's. So she is just recently retired from the hospital there. And
it was great.
They're all in good shape. Just quickly, as we head into the weekend, John Tory, just your advice for the four leaders going into the debate. What should they be focusing on over the next few days?
I would have said, frankly, for Bonnie Crombie and Premier Ford, just keep doing what you're doing. Premier Ford, avoid the distractions of getting pushed off the leadership issue, which is really what and the tariff and the economy issue. And for Bonnie Crombie, keep focused on the healthcare issue and on the fact there are other things that are very important to the lives of people that are not being addressed or haven't been adequately addressed. And I think, and I think for the other two, I mean, as was said earlier, Merritt Stiles has to get sort of have a point to her campaign. She's been on the affordability thing, no question, but I don't think it's punched through. And Mike Schreiner, I think he just has to keep doing what he's doing. He's running actually quite a solid campaign. It's just hard when you're in that kind of a party where, you know, they poll 4 or 5%.
Amanda?
I agree with my old boss. Yeah, I think that Doug Ford and Bonnie Crombie, I listened to her on News Talk yesterday with John Moore. I thought she actually did really well. He called her howitzer of talking points. So I think Bonnie should continue that. Maybe breathe a little bit more and say slower, but I thought she did well. You know, I think the NDP campaign has the visuals in a good place, but I think they need to be punchier. And hopefully she has some of those punches back during the debate. And Mike Schreiner's a really nice guy, so hopefully they get a couple ridings, but I don't think it's beyond that.
Keith?
Well, Schreiner is going to come in and win the debate, basically, because he's the nice guy everyone gets along with, and he's very reasonable and a good debater at that. But in the long run, we know it's going to be everybody against Doug Ford, and they need, quite frankly, all three of them need to just stay focused on Ford and his government's record. And Ford, of course, to everyone else's point here, he just needs to stay on his message. You know, I'm here to protect Ontario. It's working for them. The tariff thing is it's a massive threat to Ontario's economy. And for some reason, he has been able to portray himself as the best one to deal with that. And I don't think during this campaign at all, I mean, the others obviously don't want to talk about tariffs, but they certainly haven't been able to portray themselves as being better than Doug Ford would be at dealing with that particular issue. They've got to concentrate on the healthcare and the cost of living stuff. And keep hammering away at it and at his government's record. I mean, it's healthcare itself, as I said before, it's got so many different issues, from the emergency departments to the lack of family doctors. And of course, it all ties into homelessness. All of it together, this government should be vulnerable on. And so in the debate, that's the issues I'd focus on. Unless
they clip John Wright's experience at St. Michael's and all of a sudden turn that to the premier's benefit. And to use another cultural reference back to the 70s, is the premier's strategy then, John Wright, just to play rope-a-dope?
No, I think he's got a great message. I mean, protect Ontario, jobs. Like he'll stick as much as he can onto that, and he'll also talk about the very things that he's raised. I go with the panel and say, I think Bonnie Crombie, this is her moment. We all know that whenever we listen to the debate or we watch the debate, there's those of us who do, and then there's the vast majority who don't. And what will happen is that the next day, and the news cycle that runs for the 48 hours, will actually say who won and who lost. And to those people, you know, that's who they will say who won and lost. Oftentimes it's very different from those who are there watching and hearing it to those who actually it has a big impact. And not everybody at all is going to watch this. I think, you know, this is a real opportunity with the back part of this campaign left for Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals to get really focused on what I would call the human agenda. This is an urban mix, and it's a personal thing. You know, it's like the healthcare, but it's also the urban issues. I mean, when she's on in Toronto and she's talking about the spa and the tunnel and, you know, some of the other issues where she's got some concrete to drive the issue more than the healthcare, then she's hitting those points for those local candidates. And so I think, you know, again, you got to go where you can get the votes. And if you're starting to get some urban response to and some lift, that's where she's got to position it. And I got to tell you, her performance, how she reacts in the debate, as opposed to, you know, the screaming and yelling that often happens in these debates. Don't get into that. And it happens for guys as well as, you know, the female candidates and try to talk over each other. She's got to show herself that she is up to the job. And I think that's what's going to come out of this. It's not just the agenda, but the performance, because people are still getting to know her. And I think that's what's going to be really important in this debate.
All right. Well, let's leave it there. Keith Leslie, John Tory, Amanda Galbraith, John Wright, thank you all for being here. And just on that note, we will be doing a post-debate edition of On the Ledge. It'll be our regular podcast in the evening, but we'll be broadcasting it live on News Talk 1010. So again, if you're not hanging around after the debate to hear it on the radio, it will be available probably where you're listening to this right now, maybe iHeart, Apple, Spotify. What we won't do on that one is the video. So you'll just have to put up with us and listen to us. But we will have the crew around the table and the analysis that John Wright was talking about, and be just looking forward to seeing how all of this plays out. Could it be that this debate actually moves the needle more so than we've seen debates in the past few election campaigns? All right. And by the way, if there's something that you want to add to the program, you can go to my website, davetrafford.com, click on the talkback message button on the Ledge page. Leave us the message. What do you think? What haven't we thought of? What have we missed? What did we get wrong? Obviously, oftentimes people are not shy about sharing that with us. And I see some folks are adding their comments into the talkback message. And so we'll sift through them. And as we need them, we'll drop them into the program in future episodes of On the Ledge. So thanks for being with us. And if you like it, hit the like button, share it, follow the show wherever you happen to be watching or listening. Thanks again. I'm Dave Trafford. It's On the Ledge, the Ontario Politics Podcast, the daily edition for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.